He thought it was routine, just another visit, just another check, nothing that would change anything, the kind of day that usually passes without leaving a mark. But what he didn't realize in that moment was how quickly things can shift when something small refuses to stay small, because just 3 days later, 500 tractors would be blocking the roads, and what started as a simple visit would turn into something no one could ignore. At the beginning, there was nothing unusual about it. He had been working the same land for years, dealing with the same equipment, solving problems on his own without needing to depend on anyone else. This wasn't someone guessing his way through things. This was someone who understood every sound, every response, every detail of the machine he used every day. So when the time came for a routine inspection, there was no hesitation, no second thoughts, just another task to get done. The process felt familiar. He arrived, handed everything over, and waited. There was no urgency in his mind, no sense that anything was wrong. From his perspective, everything was working exactly the way it should. The machine had been running fine. No unusual behavior, no warning signs, nothing that would suggest a hidden issue. It was the kind of situation where you expect things to go smoothly. And for a while, it did. But when the inspection was complete, something changed. Not slowly, instantly. The tone shifted. The way they spoke to him wasn't the same anymore. What had started as routine suddenly felt different. And then came the explanation. They told him there was a problem inside the machine, something that shouldn't have been there, something unauthorized. At first, it didn't register because it didn't make sense. He knew that machine. He had worked on it, maintained it, paid attention to it in ways most people wouldn't. The idea that something had been added without his knowledge didn't just sound unlikely. It sounded wrong, but the explanation didn't stop there. That one claim came with a consequence. The coverage was gone, just like that. No warning, no discussion, no chance to question it before the decision had already been made. What should have been covered was now his responsibility, and the cost wasn't small. It was the kind of number that forces you to pause, not just because of the money, but because of how easily it appeared. For a moment, it felt like one of those situations where you're expected to accept what you're told and move on, because that's how it usually works. A system makes a decision, and unless you're ready to fight it, the outcome doesn't change. And most people don't fight it, not because they agree, but because it feels pointless. But something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the decision, it was how quickly it had been made, how little explanation there was behind it. So instead of reacting, he asked for something simple: proof, something he could see, something that would make the claim real. But there was nothing, no image, no part, no clear evidence of what they were describing, just a statement, already written down as if that was enough. And that's where the situation started to feel different, because now it wasn't just about the cost, it was about control. A decision had been made, and it didn't seem to require any justification beyond itself. At that point, most people would have stopped, paid the amount, moved on, because pushing back means time, effort, and uncertainty, and in most cases, nothing changes anyway. That's what makes systems like this effective. They don't need to convince you, they just need you to stop questioning. And that's exactly what they expected. But instead of letting it go, he did something else. He went back, not physically, but mentally, thinking through what had happened, what he knew, what didn't match. And the more he thought about it, the more it felt like something wasn't adding up. So he started looking, going through what he had. Old records, previous inspections, anything that could explain where this difference came from. Not in a rush, not out of anger, just trying to understand. And that's when he found it. A document from before any of this started. A record from an earlier inspection, from a time when everything had been checked and approved. And in that record, everything was clear. No modification, no issue, no unauthorized part, nothing. Now there were two completely different versions of the same machine. One saying everything was fine, the other saying something had changed. And both couldn't be true. That's when the situation shifted again. Because now it wasn't confusion anymore. It was contradiction. And once you see that clearly, it becomes impossible to ignore. Something had gone wrong. Not in the machine, but somewhere in the process around it. Even then, he didn't try to turn it into something big. He didn't go public. He didn't try to create attention. Instead, he did something much simpler. He made a call. Not to complain, not to escalate, just to explain what had happened to someone he trusted, someone who would understand why it didn't make sense. It was a normal conversation, quiet, direct. No intention behind it other than sharing what had happened. But some situations don't stay quiet. That one call turned into another, then another. Not instantly, not dramatically, just gradually. One person telling another, another recognizing something familiar, conversation spreading through people who understood exactly what it meant. And slowly, the perspective started to change. What looked like one isolated issue started to feel bigger, not because of noise, not because of attention, but because of how many people recognized the same pattern. By the next day, it wasn't just a conversation anymore. Something had started moving. Before sunrise, one tractor showed up. No announcement, no signal, just presence. Then another followed, and another. From different directions, different places, different people who had all reached the same conclusion without needing to say it out loud. As the morning unfolded, the numbers kept growing. What started as a few became dozens. What looked small began to take shape. Not chaotic, not aggressive, just deliberate. Machines placed in a way that slowed everything down. Roads that were meant to stay open weren't anymore. And suddenly, the situation wasn't invisible. Inside, everything changed. What had been distant became immediate. What had been ignored now required attention. Calls started happening faster, conversations shifted tone, because what was happening outside couldn't be handled quietly anymore. And that's when the outcome changed. The same issue that had been dismissed was now being reviewed again. The same decision that felt final was suddenly open. Not because the system changed on its own, but because the situation around it had changed. And when everything was looked at properly, it didn't hold. The explanation didn't stand. The decision didn't make sense. And once that became clear, the response came quickly. The coverage was restored. The responsibility was corrected. But by then, the situation had already become something bigger than a single decision. Because in the end, this was never just about one machine. It was about what happens when something that feels small doesn't stay small, when a single moment turns into something others recognize, something they respond to, something that doesn't get ignored. He thought he was alone, and for a while, it really did feel that way. But clearly, he wasn't. And that leaves one simple question. If you were in that position, would you have accepted it quietly, or would you have done the same? And more importantly, if the people around him hadn't shown up, would anything have changed? If you believe stories like this matter, if you think people should know what really happens behind decisions like these, then make sure you're subscribed, because there are more stories like this, and they don't always end the same way. And tell me this in the comments. When a system makes a decision without proof, should people accept it or push back?